Upon arrival, they found 2 males pulled from the water, he says. 1 they saved. But Malcolm, despite their best efforts, showed no vital signs and was pronounced dead on the scene.
They wouldn't let me help. He could have made it. Those were the chilling words of a U.S. trauma surgeon who just happened to be vacationing in Costa Rica the very same day Malcolm-Jamal Warner's life was cut short. Words that have now added a disturbing layer to what had been framed publicly as nothing more than a tragic drowning.
This is where the Cosby Show star Malcolm-Jamal Warner's life suddenly and shockingly ended over the weekend. You can see right now there's a red flag blowing in the wind here. That is a warning that people should not be swimming in these waters, and you can see some choppy waves out here. A source close to Warner tells NBC News that he was here with his wife and his young daughter.
According to his account, he was staying just a few hundred feet away from the spot where Warner was pulled from the water, and when he noticed the commotion, his instinct as a physician kicked in. He sprinted toward the scene, ready to intervene. By the time he arrived, Red Cross responders were already performing CPR on Warner, but the doctor, who identified himself immediately as a certified trauma surgeon from the United States, claims his offer of help was refused.
It can be very dangerous.
Carl Collar lives near the Caribbean beach where the actor lost his life.
They have riptides here that can suck you out to sea, and that's what happened to Malcolm-Jamal Warner.
There are reports that lifeguards were not on duty.
It's rare. You almost never see lifeguards most of the beaches.
Red flags are often seen on the beach.
Not only that, 2 other doctors, both also on vacation and nearby, also stepped forward, identified themselves, and begged to be allowed to assist in resuscitation efforts. All 3, according to this account, were kept back and forced to watch from the sidelines as paramedics struggled to revive Warner.
And then take a look at this. This massive sign says you can survive a rip current. Clearly, they're warning people about the conditions that can develop, and unfortunately, the conditions appear to have pulled out Malcolm-Jamal Warner over the weekend.
The surgeon insists that such a refusal is not only unusual but deeply suspicious, because in medical emergencies, especially life and death situations, the more hands the better, and professional help is almost never turned away. Yet despite their protests, the responders allegedly ignored them, and within minutes Warner was pronounced dead at the scene, while another male swimmer, who had been pulled from the same waters, was stabilized and survived. This single detail reframes everything.
That's all I got. Listen to love because it's been a minute. Peace and love, and I'll be back soon.
A drowning is tragic, but a drowning in which 3 qualified doctors were denied access, while a celebrity lay unresponsive feels less like bad luck and more like a controlled situation. One that immediately prompts uncomfortable questions about what really happened in those final moments. Local officials were quick to point out that the coastline where Warner drowned, Pia Grande in Limon Province, is notorious for dangerous rip currents. Residents there have long complained that the beach is unsafe for families, that lifeguards are rarely present, and that warning signs about currents and surf conditions are posted every season. Reports from that day confirm that waves were rough, the beach sparsely populated, and conditions difficult even for experienced swimmers. Early coverage painted a heartbreaking picture of Warner throwing himself into the water to save his young daughter from a rip current, only for tragedy to strike. But that detail was quickly corrected. Warner's daughter had not been in the water at all. She was safe onshore the entire time. So why was that story pushed first? Why the emotional image of a father risking his life for his child, only for officials to walk it back within 24 hours? As more details emerged, the narrative shifted again, this time pointing to a second adult swimmer, initially described as a stranger who attempted to help Warner. Later that description changed. He was no stranger but a friend of Warner's, someone who had been in the water alongside him. This second swimmer was reported to be in critical condition, a life or death struggle that seemed to echo Warner's own battle. But then, just as abruptly, the story shifted yet again. Within a day, the second swimmer was no longer critical, but stable enough to be discharged. his condition improving so quickly that many began to wonder if he had ever been on the brink at all. To this day, the identity of that swimmer has never been made public, a curious omission given how central his presence was to the incident. Meanwhile, Warner's body was removed quickly, transported by ambulance, and within hours the official ruling was announced: accidental drowning, asphyxia by submersion. What shocked many observers was not just the verdict, but the speed with which it was delivered. Celebrity cases typically involve a thorough autopsy and toxicology report that can take weeks, sometimes months, before any official cause of death is made public. Yet in Warner's case, within 24 to 48 hours, the file was closed, the verdict sealed, and authorities moved on. For fans and insiders, the speed itself felt like a red flag, as if the priority was to shut down speculation before it had a chance to take root. And yet, the inconsistencies and unanswered questions only made speculation louder. Who was the second swimmer, and why has his story been so carefully managed? Why were 3 doctors, trauma surgeon, prevented from helping a man who might have still been saved? And why was the cause of death released at record speed, with no transparent explanation of the autopsy process? Locals, of course, insist the dangers of Pia Grande are real. Longtime residents note that lifeguards are rare, rip currents are constant, and red warning flags are almost always present. One man who lives near the beach bluntly said, "They have riptides here that can suck you out to sea, and that's what happened to Malcolm-Jamal Warner." Yet that explanation, while plausible on its surface, doesn't address the inconsistencies piling up around the response. The trauma surgeon's repeated claim that he could have made a difference, that Warner had a fighting chance, is especially haunting because it plants the idea that Warner's death was not inevitable, that he was denied a lifeline in those critical minutes. What makes this even heavier is Warner's own reputation in the years leading up to his death. He was no longer just remembered as Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show. He had been using his platform to speak openly about systemic racism, inequality, and the burdens carried by Black men in America. He gave interviews where he challenged institutions, asking audiences how invested they truly were in eradicating racism, pointing out that the responsibility could not rest solely on Black communities, but had to be a shared burden. Clips from his speeches now feel almost prophetic, a man aware of the risks that came with speaking truth to power, yet determined to continue anyway. In the wake of his death, fans have begun connecting dots to a larger pattern. Influential Black voices cut down in so-called accidents, deaths wrapped in neat narratives of overdoses, crashes, or drownings, all tied off quickly with official rulings, while unanswered questions are left to rot. The background: Warner's rumored exploration of sensitive religious and cultural history only adds another layer to the suspicion. Friends say he had been researching a project that probed the long debated theory that the historical Jesus and original Hebrews were Black, a topic that has sparked backlash for decades whenever mainstream figures bring it forward. In one resurfaced clip, Warner spoke candidly about how the act of being Black often means performing acrobatics to defend one's humanity in a world that still worships a pale Anglo-Saxon image of Christ, despite biblical descriptors of woolly hair and bronzed skin. Such remarks, while intellectual and rooted in scholarship, have historically drawn fierce opposition, making it plausible that a documentary from Warner on this theme could have rattled certain powerful circles. Whether or not that research is connected to his death, it highlights the stakes he was navigating. And so the picture becomes more unsettling with every piece. A dangerous beach, a second swimmer whose story shifts daily, doctors barred from intervening, an unusually fast official ruling, and a man whose voice was growing bolder in ways that made some uncomfortable. Was Warner's drowning the tragic result of bad luck and poor conditions? Or was it something orchestrated? A moment where the line between rescue and obstruction was deliberately drawn. That question, left dangling by the trauma surgeon's testimony, is what haunts this case of Warner's story feel less like a closed book and more like the opening chapter of a much bigger investigation still waiting to be told. When news broke, early headlines told the emotional story of a father risking everything to save his child, an act of love that tragically cost him his life. The framing was powerful, immediate, and cinematic. A father and daughter swept up in a rip current with only one making it back. But that story collapsed within hours. Officials clarified that Warner's daughter had never entered the water at all, that she was on shore the entire time, safe and unthreatened. Suddenly, the hero, father narrative evaporated, replaced by a less dramatic version. Warner and another adult swimmer caught in a rip current. That second swimmer became the new puzzle piece, introduced as a stranger who attempted to intervene, then reintroduced as a friend swimming alongside Warner, someone much closer to the actor than first described. His condition, we were told, was critical, suggesting that two men had fought desperately for survival against a violent current. Yet within barely a day, the storyline shifted once more. This man, whose condition had been described as life-threatening, was suddenly stable enough to be discharged. For a public already reeling from Warner's death, this rapid turnaround raised eyebrows. Critical cases rarely swing to full stability so quickly, not without prolonged observation or explanation. But in this case, the press provided neither. Even more striking was the silence about his identity. Who was this second swimmer? Why was his name withheld when he was central to the event? In most drowning incidents involving celebrities, the names of accompanying witnesses or companions emerge quickly, either through official statements, eyewitness accounts, or simple media digging. Yet here, weeks passed, and still no one could definitively say who Warner's companion was, why his condition had been reported so dramatically, or why his discharge was glossed over with little detail. Skeptics began to argue that the shifting narrative was not incompetence but curation, that each version of the story was being carefully managed to steer public perception and preempt deeper scrutiny. Then there was the matter of the timeline itself. Witnesses recalled seeing two men pulled from the water, one resuscitated, the other declared dead. But the attending trauma surgeon emphasized that Warner showed no vital signs only after minutes of restricted intervention. His statement implied that if help had been immediate, Warner's outcome might have been different. And yet the official record reads like a procedural checklist. Drowned victim, attempted CPR, no success, cause determined, case closed. That rapid closure extended beyond the scene. Authorities wasted no time in labeling Warner's death an accidental drowning, citing asphyxia by submersion within just 24 to 48 hours. While on paper, this may look efficient, in reality, it raised suspicions. Celebrity deaths, especially in foreign jurisdictions, typically require extensive forensic work. Toxicology tests alone can take weeks, sometimes months, before results are released. Autopsies are reviewed, families are consulted, official documents are finalized with care. But in Warner's case, within 2 days the verdict was out, the press briefed, and the narrative sealed tight. Fans and observers noted that this speed did not feel like efficiency. It felt like preemption, as if officials were racing to get ahead of rumors rather than methodically investigating the truth. What deepened the discomfort was the environment where this tragedy occurred. Pia Grande, a stretch of coastline in Costa Rica's Limon province, is infamous among locals for its rip currents. Residents describe the beach as deceptively beautiful but hazardous, the kind of place where an inexperienced swimmer can be swept out in seconds. Lifeguards, they insist, are rarely seen there. Red flags are often posted, but they serve more as warnings than safeguards, since supervision is almost non-existent. One local said bluntly, "You almost never see lifeguards on most of these beaches." That detail matters because Warner's drowning happened in exactly the kind of high-risk environment officials warn about. And yet on the day in question, no lifeguards were present. If Warner and his companion were indeed caught in a rip current, their struggle might have ended differently had trained rescue staff been on duty. Instead, the emergency response was left to local Red Cross volunteers, whose decision to block 3 doctors from assisting remains the most glaring contradiction of all. Think about the strangeness of that. 3 qualified physicians, 1 a certified U.S. trauma surgeon, all actively offering help, all turned away while a man's life hung in the balance. The surgeon later expressed disbelief, noting that standard protocol in such emergencies welcomes any skilled assistance, especially from doctors with trauma expertise. Why then were they sidelined? Was it territorial pride on the part of the responders, unwillingness to allow outsiders to intervene? Was it a language barrier, a misunderstanding, or something darker? A deliberate choice to limit Warner's chances of survival. That single decision, blocking help, remains the fulcrum on which this entire case pivots. It's one thing for a rip current to claim a life. It's another for medical professionals to be prevented from saving it. And this is where the narrative intersects uncomfortably with Warner's own public life. In the years leading up to his death, he had grown increasingly outspoken on issues of race, justice, and history. He was no longer simply an actor, but a voice calling out inequality, urging others to carry the shared burden of dismantling systemic racism. Some of his recorded speeches and interviews reveal a man deeply invested in uncomfortable truths that powerful systems often resist. At the same time, rumors circulated that Warner was preparing a project exploring the Black lineage of Jesus and the Hebrews, a subject that has historically provoked backlash whenever mainstream figures touch it. The argument is not fringe, it's supported by biblical descriptors and geography, by scholars who have long noted that the Anglo-Saxon image of Christ is a revisionist invention. Yet it remains highly controversial, and any public figure willing to amplify it risks backlash, ridicule, or worse. Warner, according to those close to him, was leaning into that conversation. In this light, the inconsistencies surrounding his death take on an eerie resonance. Fans see a pattern: Black figures who challenge narratives, who speak out against entrenched power, too often meet sudden, accidental ends, car crashes, overdoses, drownings. The causes differ, but the speed with which cases are closed and questions buried feels familiar. And Warner's death, with its rushed ruling, shifting stories, missing names, and blocked doctors, fits the mold all too neatly. Was this truly a random tragedy, the result of a dangerous rip current and bad timing, or was it something else, an avoidable death shrouded in the language of accident? By the time the official reports had been neatly tied up and the media cycle moved on, those who had been following Malcolm-Jamal Warner's final days closely were left with an unsettling dissonance. A celebrated actor, activist, and father had drowned on a beach notorious for rip currents. But instead of a transparent, exhaustive investigation befitting someone of his stature, the world was handed a narrative that felt prematurely closed, rushed, and riddled with contradictions. Begin with the blocked doctors. The trauma surgeon's testimony is not a rumor or conspiracy. It's a first-hand account from a professional whose credibility is built on years of life and death training. When he says Warner could have made it, that's not idle speculation. It's a clinical judgment. Add to that the fact that 2 additional physicians were also kept away, and you get a situation that looks less like miscommunication and more like obstruction. If Warner truly had no chance, why would emergency responders feel the need to prevent multiple doctors from trying, even if their efforts ultimately failed? Isn't every second of skilled intervention worth attempting when a life is slipping away? That refusal casts a shadow over everything that followed, because it means the possibility of survival will never be known, and more importantly, that possibility was denied. Now fold in the shifting stories, the phantom daughter rescue that was never real, the mystery second swimmer whose role was rewritten multiple times and whose identity was never revealed, the miraculous recovery from critical to stable without explanation. Each of these discrepancies alone might be chalked up to chaotic reporting, but stacked together, they form a pattern of manipulation, as though the narrative was being molded in real time to control perception rather than clarify truth. The secrecy surrounding the second swimmer is especially glaring. Who was he? Why was he portrayed as both stranger and friend? Why was his discharge so swift and his name kept hidden? The silence invites speculation, and in the absence of answers, theories emerge, some benign, some chilling, but all rooted in the same unease, that there is something about that day the public is not supposed to know. Then there's the speed of the official cause, of death ruling, which deserves its own scrutiny. Asphyxia by submersion is of course a medical reality of drowning, but the fact that this conclusion was released within 48 hours, complete with a declaration of accidental circumstances, while Warner's body had barely been transported, stands out as extraordinary. In high-profile cases, especially when they occur abroad, due diligence usually stretches weeks or months. Toxicology reports take time, family consultations take time, and final statements are delayed until every stone has been turned. But here, the verdict was not only rapid, it was definitive, leaving no room for alternative explanations. Why the hurry? Why the rush to silence speculation when speculation was exactly what the gaps in the story were bound to generate? To understand the stakes, one has to consider Warner not just as an actor, but as a man who had evolved into a socially conscious voice. In interviews and speeches, he spoke candidly about systemic racism, inequality, and the collective responsibility to dismantle it. He was challenging audiences, especially comfortable ones, to not just be aware, but to act. In a cultural climate where outspoken black voices often face disproportionate pushback, Warner's growing confidence in addressing these topics was both inspiring and risky. And then there was the rumored project, his interest in producing or supporting work that examined the African lineage of biblical figures, including Jesus himself. That subject has historically drawn intense backlash because it doesn't just touch religion, it touches identity, power, and the narratives that underpin centuries of cultural dominance. For a mainstream figure like Warner to validate those conversations was, in the eyes of many, dangerous. Not because the ideas are unfounded. Biblical descriptions of woolly hair and burnt, brass feet point clearly toward a non-European figure, but because acknowledging them forces a reckoning with centuries of misrepresentation. In this context, Warner's death begins to resemble a pattern that is all too familiar. How many times have we seen public figures who dare to question dominant narratives, or who grow too loud in their critique of injustice, suddenly silenced by accidents? The list is long enough to chill anyone who dares connect the dots. Car crashes, overdoses, drownings, each cloaked in plausible deniability, each quickly resolved by officials, each leaving behind a chorus of what-ifs. Warner's case, with its blocked doctors, contradictory reports, hidden identities, absent lifeguards, and lightning fast closure, does not stand outside this pattern, it sits squarely within it.